I got it from the Indian kids.
Cute little face over there.
Yeah.
All right, we're rolling. Shadowworks blog 1 million. What are we talking about today, Uncle?
Oh, you wanted to talk about things that I can't begin to answer. Conflict resolution,
Yes.
stuff like
conflict,
that. I mean, I'm...
Ego states.
Ego, well, we can talk
resolution.
about all the ego states that go into the whole process of conflict. You can talk
Okay.
about the essential, I hate to talk about it like this, but anybody who's ever read people like Sartre, anybody who's ever tried to do any honest evaluation of the conditions of the human species, with not just the millions of people slaughtered, millions and millions of people being slaughtered every century, in the proportions of people being murdered. But not just that, that's because that's like the eruption. That's like the result of an identification with something you think is going to resolve everything, and so it becomes the eruption, you call it war.
Identification with what?
There you go. What are you identifying with when you go to war? Well, the people identify enough with the government so that maybe they back it during the time. People call for war sometimes, and a lot of people call away from war. So it's not just one thing. It's a matter of identifying. Like America first. When America was attacked, it wasn't any big deal for the president to eventually go attack the Taliban in Afghanistan, even though they weren't the perpetrators. It's because they are all of that ilk. Therefore, we disidentify with them. We identify with ourselves as solid Americans and this and this and that. Look, I'm not condemning I just condemn most of what the human species does. So we're a crazy species. We kill each other all the time. We treat each other as if we're not connected, like the grapes of wrath that I wrote years ago. We're like a big cluster of grapes slaughtering each other. We all come from the same stem. We're all nourished by the same nutrients. We all have basically the same psychological, physiological identities. And yet we treat each other as if we were the worst enemy in the universe.
What would cause a person to become so unidentified with another that they would want to destroy them completely?
When that person somehow presents an either explicit or implicit threat to one's own existence, one's own self-esteem. Now, some people will value their image, which they think is held in the eyes of other people, much more than they will even value their own physical safety. They'll put themselves in terrible situations for the sake of image. I'm talking, young people killing each other nowadays, right? What did it take? A bad glance, talking to a kid's girlfriend? You know what I mean? It doesn't.
And how does that step by step lead down that road of destruction?
Well, there's already the
inclination.
The frozen ego. The frozen ego starts early in life. When the kid becomes a self-independent being by saying no at the age of 2, I am not you. There's that first stage of independence. That thing can be developed in different ways depending upon the conditions, the conditioners, right? How many people really know how to raise children without poisoning them? And you think you don't poison them? I knew somebody in our own family, I was talking one day to him about how conditioning deeply influences people. He was of the assumption that only certain things actually condition you. He doesn't realize the whole thing is a wash. You're swimming in conditioning every single moment. And whatever you do, like if you treat your child, once in a while you pet your dog. Once in a while you give your child something, but most of the time you neglect him or her. That's conditioning. And the way you extinguish certain behaviors is by ignoring them. That's the best way, the most effective way, according to our behaviorists. And they're right.
So it's a catch-22. you're conditioning whether or not you're intending on conditioning.
Exactly.
The cause and effect is always occurring whether or not you have any influence over it.
Absolutely. We are awash in we are awash in an ocean of causality and effects and all the consequences. And every consequence becomes a cause for something else. This is an enormous chain of being.
Yeah. As I've gotten older, I've realized it more and more how little control and influence we can have over things, and just how many things subconsciously are occurring, especially observing people in my industry, in this room, observing people not realizing that they are essentially their own obstacle in their success. And also more than that, like it's not just them being their own obstacle, but the every experience that they've had up until this point has caused that set of conditions that has become their obstacle.
Yeah, you're right. It's as if you're pushing a huge part of the ocean, and every little thing you do is having an effect on the entirety of the ocean. Imagine if you were a molecule swimming in the oceans of the earth, how tiny you would be compared to them. Let's say you're in the middle of the Pacific, which is the biggest, but you're connected to all the other oceans as they are, okay? And you know it, and you realize it. That would be crushing for a lot of people. Lots and lots of people, when they started to become aware of the concepts of determinism, things like that, when you begin to focus on the entire thing that we call causality, it's the whole universe. You don't know what's cause and what's effect either at that point. It's like, as I've said, you picture a gigantic glass bubble, and inside of it is smoke. And since it's unaffected by gravity, it has its own gravity, internal gravity, but there's no gravity outside of it to affect it as a unit. And so it continues to float and to roil. I like to use the word roil and boil. And it's always in flux. This some of the Greeks knew, that everything's in flux. You are in flux while you're in relationship to the world of flux. That includes other people who are also in flux. Everything is changing, and you've got to be really light on your feet to transcend this. Otherwise, you're going to get hurt. And most of us just get hurt. We identify. We want something to be a solid. We'd like to believe. We go back to our original point. We like to believe in leaders and people like that. They represent us.
Yeah.
And of course, they disappoint you because they're all flawed human beings with their own self-interest at heart, but they claim to be patriots and all this and that. No, you can't trust anybody who wants to sit in a position of power. You can say they're a good people, but circumstances will tear out the heart of good people. And I use the perfect example. You know, when you're not so naive, you think there are just some good people, right? Here's one. It was in the 1940s. The Germans were beating the hell out of England. They were sending their Luftwaffe over the skies of England nightly and bombing places, just terrorizing the populace. But they used to communicate using their system called Ultra. It was an encrypted kind of message board. I don't understand any of that, but that's how they communicated with each other. And they were certain nobody could crack the code. They were the Germans, very smart technologically. But there's a guy in England named Turing. You may have heard of him. Well, I don't need to go into his background, but this is a mathematical genius. And he cracked the code. And so now the British knew what the Germans were planning when they would send messages over. They understood what was being said. And they knew, therefore, one night that the Germans were planning to bomb a town called Coventry. Yeah, just like our Coventry. Our Coventry is named after it. And so Churchill was prime minister. Now, everybody looks at Churchill as a great hero of the Second World War. I mean, he like put England on his back, and he willed them not to give in to the Germans, and they eventually wound up winning with our help. But one night, his decision had to be, do I send up the RAF, the Royal Air Force, to intercept the German bombers about to bomb Coventry into nothing, it's a terrible firestorm. What they eventually did was to produce a firestorm. People simply disappeared. They turned to dust in the fire. That's how hot it was. The town got bombed. Why? Because Churchill decided if he sent up the RAF, they're going to know that we cracked the code, and they're going to change it, and we'll be back to nothing. And when they get ready to bomb London like that, we're not going to know. So there was his reasoning. You can understand it. I never read that he said that, but you know that's what his thinking was. He had to save the card for a bigger pot, if I can use.
Yeah, he had the ace in his pocket.
Yeah, he had to use it only under the best circumstances because he knew his enemy.
Right.
And so
Terrible.
he let it happen. 8,000 dead, I think. Many thousands more hurt, wounded, destroyed. Many people simply disappeared. The firestorm, when they bombed it, I mean, it was amazing. It was just amazing. Sad.
So
So a good man made a decision to allow thousands of people to have their lives destroyed. Not only the dead, but the living.
for hopefully the benefit of the rest of the people.
See, that's at the foundation of a philosophy, an ethical philosophy called utilitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest good for the greatest number. You can wind up doing some pretty awful things using that philosophy. That was, of course, produced by British philosophers. I don't need to go into that. There are people probably strangling on this stuff already.
So let's tie it back to the original point of conflict. And so conflict arises within an individual, not just externally. We can't just defer blame to the external, right?
Right.
It is something that can only truly be dealt with within.
Personally, I don't see, okay, you can maybe establish conditions to help people. Skinner, for instance, he wrote Walden 2. It was his attempt to employ a society that is not based upon individual merit. It's all got to do with his theory of human freedom as being a delusion, that we are just robots. And so he called his major book Beyond Freedom and Dignity, Beyond Free Will, and therefore merit, dignity. You don't merit anything, you're just doing anything, all this stuff, because you are thoroughly the result of a whole host of causes. He placed a lot of it on the conditions, and thus people just resented that. But if you include all the other factors that make up your life, including your DNA, everything that goes into you, every TV show that you've ever watched, every moment of thought that you've had that just goes into the big hopper, which is just another way of talking about all those those neurons that communicate with one another in your brain. And the more you think about this stuff, the more you represent conflict between people. You see all these Hollywood shows where the heroes are shooting other people in the face constantly. That like it's perfectly okay to kill the enemy. They're pretty funny. They're calling to end violence in America by taking away all the American guns, but these people are the greatest perpetrators of violent conditioning that the world has ever seen. They make Goebbels look like an amateur.
I had a conversation about arming people in general and teaching kids about weaponry. And the argument against teaching kids about weaponry is that it's accessible now, and it's the idea that it can be used is a dangerous idea in the first place. My argument against that was if you don't teach people about dangerous things, they're still dangerous. So if if it's still there and there's no way to completely get rid of weaponry, then you're merely disarming yourself.
That's a perfect way to say it. If you cannot eliminate all the weapons, I mean, there's what you hear all the time, I see all the time on Facebook. So you can't control any of this guy is saying to Congress, and he makes a list of all the things, including the shootings, including all kinds of aberrational behavior in America. You can't control any of this, but you think that you're gonna control the criminals by taking the guns away
Right.
from law-abiding citizens.
Right.
No, I mean, and then history shows what happens to societies where that happens. The government just completely controls them,
Right.
crushes them. So even if, I mean, there would be no victory against the United States Army,
Right.
or a bunch of people with shotguns and 22 carbines and
Right.
stuff like that.
Right.
But, I mean,
Right.
nobody's gonna defeat the US Army, but they're just saying that you wanna make it faster and easier for yourself.
I think I heard.
You can't blame them for not believing in leaders of government.
Right. Yeah, well, people would hope that being peaceful would cause conflict resolution. And I think that's kind of what spawned the idea of this conversation for me, was that you cannot project your peace upon someone else.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good way to put it, John.
It's selfish to think that you can.
Yeah, it's egoistical. It's more than egotistical. But look, what you see in political parties is one side against the other. Each side believes that its side is correct, and therefore will actually turn its back on not just the flaws of the leaders, but even the criminal actions of the leaders.
Mm.
So what's going on now is one group of criminals is looking at another group who probably is not nearly so criminal, has not been in government for decades and decades, sucking off the system in various ways, making themselves filthy rich and even more powerful than ever. And thus you have various people identifying with them enough to say, well, it's okay because they're on our side. So in other words, there's no real idea of morality at stake here. It's not ethics. No, it's just this side against that side. I don't like you because you're vulgar, you're vain. We got a crazy vain guy in the right. He's vain, he's vulgar, he's insulting, he hurts people's feelings, and he appoints people to positions. I don't want those people in those positions because it's an implication that he believes so much in free enterprise that he'll put in these moguls of big business in positions that can actually hurt the environment. Okay, so he makes mistakes, in my opinion, but he also tries to do everything he can. He thinks that the best thing for America is free enterprise and to be tough at the negotiating table. So he plays the game like he used to play it when he was a TV guy. And he's actually more effective in producing better results in the lives of people than these inveterate, inbred, quasi-socialists who don't know what the hell they're doing. I mean, even their greatest supporter, Bill Maher, has said basically that the Democrats don't know what the hell they're doing. They never know what to do correctly. They don't just do anything right. They're in power, and so they pass their own kind of legislation. But when it comes to like fighting and all that, they don't really know what to do. And he basically uses much more vulgar language, which I would love to reiterate, but I'm not on anybody's side.
Right.
You could say I'm against everybody, because what I see, no, I'm not joking, everything is ego bound. This is why you asked me this question.
Right.
Here's my ultimate answer for today. I really fear for the species. I fear that this species doesn't have a future, because unless there comes some kind of intervention from some higher power, whether it be space aliens or God or Jesus or
Robots.
whatever, or the robots, if they have a way of helping us when they become smarter than we.
They're significantly more rational.
Right, but they
Automatic.
may just simply say, we can't fix this thing.
Right.
Let's use
Let's delete it.
what kind of spray do you put on the fungus that's on the wall.
Yeah.
But-
That's what we
so,
said, it's a bacteria. Yeah.
but I mean, they have the intelligence. Who says that we are supposed to? Yeah, I know the Churchill told us all kinds of things, that we're the center of the universe,
Yeah,
right? And there was special creation.
right.
We're not animals and we're not angels, but we're a special creation. All this kind of stuff. And now all that's been perforated. And so you've got a bunch of people wandering, a lot of young people, am I right? Wandering around without any basis to believe in anything except maybe their next pleasure.
Right.
They're just their own lives. So what I'm really saying is self-consciousness in the egoic sense. Self-consciousness, which I mean to be separative and conflictive, where everybody is perceived in a certain way. Let me size that one up. Is that one going to attack me? Is that one going to polish my ego? You know, what's that one going to do? Everybody is sized up in terms of being an instrument of sort. At some fundamental psychological level, all of us are instruments to one another. The beautiful girl that you see is an instrument in your eyes, right? That's a pleasure factor involved there. And even the girls in high school, I hope they understand the simplicity, who make fun of the fat girl. Oh, she should do this and she should do that. No, they don't want her to do anything. They want her to be that fat girl so that they will have something to step on.
A nemesis.
It's not even a nemesis. No, it's a sacrificial lamb.
Right.
It's just thank you for being unattractive. It makes me
Right.
much more attractive.
Right, because everything is viewed in terms of a hierarchy like that,
Oh,
so that
yeah,
they can step
The
up.
world of comparison
Right.
is built into the egoic perception.
So I guess there's the bottom of the ocean right there of this conversation, is that conflict is not merely arising because of some external circumstance. It truly is arising from human, the human existence,
Yeah, the human condition, which you mean your human mind, the human heart, the human emotions, the human perceptions,
Right.
the human intellectualization. Whatever the human does, it carries a human characteristic to it.
Human animal.
Yeah, an animal that has believed a lot of the bullshit about itself over the years, and
Right.
now is facing its own extinction because it can't get out of its own way.
Right.
I mean, if it's global warming, we could all be swimming.
So, I guess the beginning of a resolution to conflict could start with becoming more self-aware, not self-conscious, not idealizing oneself, but becoming more present to the moment, releasing oneself of any idealizations in the moment, being, less idealizing oneself, less constructing an ideal image of oneself in the moment, and more just existing. It would start there. Would that be correct?
That's good, that's very nice. Actually, you took the spunkiness out of me, because I was going to end this with some kind of silly joke. If we were some of those evangelists on television you see in the deep dark channels, the high numbered channels,
Yeah.
they'd be talking about all this, but the way to resolve this is to send some money. So, I'd be
Yes.
happy if some of my former students who say that they're going to watch this stuff would just write something underneath.
Yes.
Say, "Oh, you stink, Amore. You still stink as a teacher. You're the
So,
worst I ever had."
The way, everyone watching, the way to resolve conflict is to like and subscribe to this channel and to share these videos with people that you love or hate,
Yeah, there you go. Especially if you hate
so
them.
that we can get more views.
That's good. Excellent. Very good, John.
If anybody has any questions or comments or would like to see us discuss anything, please leave that in a comment below this video. Thanks again for watching, guys. This has been another Shadowworks vlog.